What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and the fight gloves are on. Oh, this. Yeah, as I was going to say, I'll get to that in a second. The fight gloves are on. We have a UFC event coming up this weekend, UFC 144, live from the Saitama Super Arena in Japan. So, I thought, in honor of the UFC's return to Japan, I would don my kimono. And, yes, this is an actual kimono, actually from Japan. This was given to me by my brother, who taught English over in Japan for a few years. So I thought it would be kind of a cool thing to do. We've got a big card. I believe we have 12 fights on the card, including 7 fights on the main card instead of the usual 5. I'm going to try to get through these fairly quickly so that we don't have another half-hour video on our hands. So let's get to it. Going to start on the undercard, and we're going to start with a featherweight fight between, and I know I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, and I always do, but I think this is how it should be pronounced, damn it, so this is how I'm going to do it. Taekwon Zhang, the Mongolian Wolf, and I know I pronounced it wrong, and I apologize, taking on Issei Tamura, and Issei Tamura is a fill-in in this fight. Originally, this was supposed to be Leonard Garcia. A little bit about the fighters. Taekwon Zhang, 15-2 pro MMA record. He's 1-1 in the UFC. He had a 48-second submission win over, I believe it was Jason Reinhardt, and he lost a unanimous decision to Darren Elkins in his other UFC fight. He's a submission machine. He's submitted 12 of his 15 pro wins have all come by submission. He loves the guillotine choke, and that can be a good thing and a bad thing. He's got a lot of wins by guillotine, but that was really the reason that he lost the Elkins fight, is that he had a lot of failed guillotine attempts, and Elkins had him on his back at that point and just basically smashed his face for 3 rounds. And one of the big things about Zhang, too, is Zhang's got a questionable gas tank. I'm a little concerned about it. His only 2 losses have both come by way of unanimous decision. And I look at, he had a fight with Danny Downs in the WEC, where the fight got into the 3rd round and he just absolutely gassed out. And I'm concerned that if this fight goes any further than, like if it goes past the 2nd round, is Zhang going to be able to keep pace? Excuse me. Taking on again Issei Tamura. He's 6-2, his pro MMA record, making his UFC debut. All of his fights up to this point have taken place in the Shudo organization in Japan. He's a wrestler. He's a training partner of Kid Yamamoto's. 5 of his 6 career wins have come by decision. But he's lost 2 of his last 3, including his last fight, which again leads me to question, remember way back when Dana White said nobody comes into the UFC off of a loss? Yeah, it kind of makes me wonder where that whole idea came from. But anyways, I'm going to stick with Taekwon Zhang in this fight. I really think that he's got enough to finish Tamura. He's certainly got more experience. He's got a couple of UFC fights under his belt now. You've got Tamura making his UFC debut, even though the fight is in Japan. I think if anybody on the card is going to get booed, it's probably going to be Zhang, simply because it's a Chinese fighter going in and fighting in Japan, you know, against a Japanese fighter. So if the Japanese crowd's going to boo anybody, it's going to be Zhang. But I'm going to take Zhang to win the fight. I'll have to go with a submission somewhere in either the 1st or 2nd round. I'll say round 2. And that's a featherweight fight, by the way. Moving on to the lightweights, Takanori Gomi, the Fireball Kid, taking on Eiji Mitsuoka. Originally, this was supposed to be George Soteropoulos in this fight, but Soteropoulos had to pull out. Gomi, 32-8-0-1 on his pro MMA career. 1-3 in the UFC, does not have a good record. He had that really epic knockout win against Tyson Griffin that really made us all think, yes, you know, Fireball Kid is back. But he's had 3 submission losses in the UFC to Kenny Florian, Clay Guida, and Nate Diaz. So he does not have a great UFC record. But, I mean, the guy is a legend of Pride. He's a legend of Shudo. Former Pride champion. I think this is a do-or-die fight for Gomi. I think as much respect as he gets from Dana White and the Fertittas for being a legend of Pride and Shudo, I think, if he drops his UFC record to 1-4, chances are he's probably not gonna, he's probably not gonna stick around. Eiji Mitsuoka, 18-7-2 on his pro career, also making his UFC debut. He's fought everywhere. He fought in Pride, King of the Cage, Deep, Shudo, Sengoku, what else? Also fought in Dream. Got notable wins over Gleason Tebow and Joaquim Hellboy Hansen. Those are both very solid wins. 11 of his 18 wins have come by submission, so we got a couple of really talented fighters here. Most of Mitsuoka's submissions have been chokes, so that's obviously something that Gomi's going to have to watch out for. Once again, I think I've said this in previous videos too, that I tend to stick with the guys that I think it's do or die for them. I really feel like this is a do or die fight for Takanori Gomi, and I think he's going to go out and I think he's going to put on a show reminiscent of his best days in Pride. So I think Takanori Gomi is going to win this fight. I think he's going to win the fight by knockout, and I think he's going to do it in the first round. I really think Takanori Gomi is going to go out and he's going to dominate and own this fight. Moving down to the bantamweights, the aforementioned Kid Yamamoto taking on Vaughn Lee. Kid Yamamoto, 18-5-0-1 on his pro career. 0-2 in the UFC, though. 0-2 since coming over. He's had unanimous decision losses against Demetrius Johnson and Darren Uwanyama. I have never known how to pronounce that guy's name. But Yamamoto's a knockout artist. 13 of his 18 pro wins have come by way of knockout. Pardon me for adjusting here. But he's actually lost 4 of his last 5 fights overall. So, could be another situation where it's a do-or-die fight. I would consider it a do-or. If I'd lost 4 of my last 5, including 2 in a row, I would consider this a do-or-die fight for him. Vaughn Lee, he is a British fighter, 11-7-1 on his pro career, 0-1 in the UFC, had a contentious split decision loss to Chris Carriasso. But he is a balls out fighter. Just watching the way the guy fights, he is balls to the wall. He's finished 10 of his 11 wins. 10 of his 11 pro wins have been finishes, 4 knockouts, 6 submissions, and in his 7 losses, he's been finished 6 times, knocked out twice, submitted 4 times. So he is not a guy that, he's certainly not a points fighter. He certainly does not like fights going to the judges. I got to take Kid Yamamoto in this fight. Once again, it's one of the situations where I think it's a do-or-die fight, and I think Kid is going to come out like a house on fire, and I think he's going to win this fight. As far as how, I would say probably either a knockout or a TKO. I'll say 3rd round TKO, because I want to give Vaughn Lee credit because I really like him as a fighter. So, but I'll go 3rd round TKO. Moving up to the middleweights, we've got Ricky Fukuda against Steve Cantwell. Ricky Fukuda, 17-5 on his pro career, 0-1 in the UFC. Had a really controversial decision loss to Nick Ring, which I think the general consensus is that he won that fight. Has one real notable win. He beat Murillo Ninja Hua at Dream 8 in what was actually a really good fight. He's got 7 wins by knockout, 9 wins by decision, so if he doesn't knock you out, it's probably going to the judges. 4 of his 5 career losses have come by decision, and this is going to be Fukuda's first fight in a year because he was injured, if you remember, in a car accident. Steve Cantwell, his opponent, 7-5 pro record, 2-1. Oh, sorry, looked at the wrong one. Actually, 1-4 in the UFC. So this is a do or die fight for Steve Cantwell as well. 1-4, like I said, in the UFC. He beat Al Hassan, I think was his one win, but then he's got 4 straight decision losses, and I'll read them off here because I had to write them down. 4 straight unanimous decision losses to Luis Kane, Brian Stann, Cyril Diabate, and Mike Masenzio. So it's not like he's fighting nobodies, he's fighting talented fighters, but he's got 4 straight losses, all by decision. All 7 of his wins, though, have been finishes. He's got 3 knockouts and 4 submission wins in his career. But he hasn't won a fight since 2008. So, I mean, it could be a long time coming for Cantwell if he does manage to win this fight. I don't think he's going to. I'm giving the edge in this one to Ricky Fukuda. I think Fukuda will probably win the fight by a unanimous judge's decision. You know, I think it'll probably be the end for Steve Cantwell in the UFC, at least this time around. Who knows, may make it back. I think, and this is actually going against everything that I usually say I do in terms of my predictions. I usually never predict for a guy that's coming off injury, and I usually never predict against a guy that I know his back's against the wall. So this is going against everything that I usually say in my predictions, but I've just got this feeling about Ricky Fukuda. I think he's going to come, and I think he's going to win this fight by a unanimous judge's decision. Going to move to the bantamweights. Takeya Mitsugaki versus Chris Cariaso. And I do just have to say, off the top, I had no idea who Chris Cariaso was until I played UFC Undisputed 3 and I saw him in the game. I apologize to Chris Cariaso. I had no idea who he was. Apparently he is a real fighter, and this is going to be his, 4th fight in the UFC? So, sorry, Chris. I apologize for that. Takeya Mitsugaki, 15-6-2. He is 2-1 in the UFC. He had a split decision win over Duran and a TKO of Cole Escovedo. And sandwiched in between those 2 wins was a unanimous decision loss against Brian Bowles. 9 of his 15 career wins have come by way of decision. Sherdog considers him top 10 at this weight class. I think that's probably legit. I think lower end of top 10 for sure. But, you know, and that's where they've got him. They've got him at number 10 on their top 10 list at bantamweight. But, you know, I think it's legit. He's got really crisp boxing. He's got a very good wrestling game, which is doing nothing but improving. And Mitsugaki at this weight is a dangerous fighter. Taking on Chris Cariaso, as I said, 12-3 pro career record, 2-1 in the UFC. Has decision wins over who do I have here? Von Lee and Campuzano, but I didn't write down his first name. As well as a decision loss to Michael McDonald. 8 of his 12 pro wins have come by decision, so he's no stranger to going the distance. He's got decent takedown defense. He's got solid Muay Thai, but he's not a finisher. And I consider Takeya Mitsugaki, even though he's only got, I think, 6 finish wins, I consider Mitsugaki a bit more of a finisher than Cariaso. I'm giving Mitsugaki the edge in the fight. It'll probably be by a judge's decision, I would imagine. But I'm going to give Mitsugaki the edge. I think he is legit top 10 at this weight class. I think he proves it in the fight with Cariaso in front of the hometown crowd. Moving on to the main card, which, as I said, has 7 fights this time around instead of the traditional 5. And we're going to start with the fight that I think has legit possibilities to be fight of the night, and that's Anthony Showtime Pettis against Joe J-Lau Lauzon. I'm a big fan of Joe Lauzon's. I think most people that know me in terms of MMA really know that. I'm a really big fan of Lauzon's. Well, we'll start with Pettis. Pettis is 14-2 on his pro career, only 1-1 in the UFC. He beat Jeremy Stevens by decision. And it might have even been a split decision. I'm not 100% sure. I didn't write it down. And had a unanimous decision loss to Clay Guida. He's a Taekwondo fighter, a purple belt in BJJ. He's finished 11 of his 14 pro wins, so only 3 have gone to the judges. Both of his career losses, though, as we mentioned there, or as I mentioned, one with Clay Guida, both of his career losses have come by decision. He's got good takedowns, good takedown defense, is an extremely accurate fighter, and like I loved watching that fight with Clay Guida because they're both so active and they both got so much energy. It was just a really entertaining lightweight fight. Taking on Joe Lauzon. Joe Lauzon 21-6, 8-3 in the UFC. He's on a 2-fight win streak, beating Warburton and Guillard in that span. For those two-fight win streak. Awesome. 17 of his 21 pro wins have come by submission. That is a phenomenal number. That's a hell of a percentage. Like it's something like 85%, close to 85% at least. And his last 4 wins in the UFC have all come by submission. This kid is the definition of a finisher. The one time first of all, he's finished all of his wins, every single one of them. He's got 4 knockouts as well. So 21 for 21 in terms of finishing. And the only time he has ever gone to a decision was he has 1 unanimous decision loss in his 27 pro fights. That is the only time that he has gone to decision. I think this fight will go to a decision. I think their ground games will mostly nullify each other. I think Lauzon will be the aggressor on the ground, but I think for the most part it's probably going to be from the bottom. I don't think Joe Lauzon will submit Anthony Pettis. I think it's going to go to a judge's decision, and in that case I got to go with the guy that's got the better stand-up, and in my opinion the guy with the better stand-up is Anthony Pettis. So I'm going to have to unfortunately go against one of my favorite fighters, which sucks, but I'm going to predict a unanimous decision victory for Showtime Pettis. Going to go to the middleweights, Yushin Okami versus Tim Boetsch, and believe it or not, this was the hardest fight for me on this card to pick a winner in. Water. It really was. This was for sure the hardest fight for me to pick. It was so tough. Well, first we'll talk about the fighters a little bit. First of all, Yushin Okami, 26-6. He's 10-3 in the UFC. He's just coming off that middleweight championship fight, lost to Anderson Silva. 12 of his 26 wins have come by decision. So almost half have come by decision. His striking and wrestling, his combination of striking and wrestling, his wrestling had always been quite good, and his striking game is really improving. But his combination of striking and wrestling makes him extremely dangerous. He's a very dangerous fighter. Tim Boetsch, 14-4 career record. He is 5-3 in the UFC, 3-1 since re-signing. He was 2-2 originally, but 3-1 since re-signing. He's on a 2-fight win streak, decision wins over Kendall Grove and Nick Ring. 11 of his 14 wins have been finishes. He's a Jeet Kune Do fighter. He's got really solid wrestling skills. This was really hard for me to pick. I thought, you know what, if I went with Boetsch, I would say, like, geez, do I think Okami's going to lose 2 straight fights? Probably not. I ended up going with Yushin Okami, but it's razor thin. I would even be willing to officially predict a split decision in this fight, which I think I actually will. I'm going to go Yushin Okami by split decision. I think the fight is going to be that close. I think their wrestling skills will basically nullify each other. And, you know, Okami's got arguably better striking than Tim Boetsch does. Or Tim Boetsch, rather. So I got to go with Okami by the skinniest of split decisions. Moving to the featherweight division, we have the consensus number 2, well, in my opinion anyways, I shouldn't say consensus, number 2 featherweight in the world, Hatsu Hayoki, taking on Bart Palashevsky, and I believe I pronounced his name right this time. I usually pronounce it Pazlewski, which I know is very wrong, but I believe I got it right that time. Hatsu Hayoki, 25-4-2 in his pro career, 1-0 in the UFC, had a split decision win over George Roop, where he didn't look like himself. but got the win. Hayaoki, longtime Shudo fighter, former Sengoku and TKO featherweight champion, so featherweight champion in 2 different companies, holds notable wins over Marlon Sandro and a pair of wins over Mark Hominick to win and defend that TKO featherweight championship. Almost half of his wins come by submission, about 12 of 25. That's pretty well par for the course when it comes to a lot of the Japanese fighters. A lot of submissions. I love Hatsu Hayaoki. I think Hatsu Hayaoki's a fantastic fighter. And I think that Hatsu Hayaoki, of any other featherweight on the planet, has got the game to beat Jose Aldo. And that's not a popular opinion, but anyways, it's mine. Palashevsky, 36-14. He's got 50 pro fights. This will be his 51st. He's 1-0 in the UFC. Had a knockout win over Tyson Griffin. Former fighter in the IFL as well as the WEC. 28 of his 36 wins have come by finishes. He's got 17 knockouts, 11 submissions, so pretty good split. He's pretty competent wherever the fight happens to go. But if it goes to the judges' scorecards, the judges have not been kind to Mr. Palashevsky. 10 of his 14 career losses have come by decision. I don't think this fight is going to go to decision. I believe the fight is actually going to be over relatively quickly. I believe Hatsu Hayaoki is going to submit Bart Palashevsky in the 2nd round. I really think that Hayaoki needs a great performance here, a dominant submission victory to really cement himself as a legit contender in the featherweight division, and I think in 2012, Hatsu Hayaoki will be the featherweight champion. 2012 or early 2013, I believe he will be featherweight champion in the UFC. Going to move from the featherweights all the way up to the heavyweights. I believe it's the only heavyweight fight on the card. Those Japanese don't like their heavyweights, unless it's a super heavyweight fighting a welterweight. Yay, pride. So heavyweight fight between Mark Hunt and Czech Congo. Mark Hunt, 7-7 pro MMA record. He's 2-1 in the UFC. Actually got a 2-fight win streak going on in the UFC. Had a knockout win over Justin Teixeira, and I think that's how you pronounce his name, and a unanimous decision win against Ben Rothwell, which was that fight in Denver, Colorado at Elevation that ended up being just horrible into the 2nd round because both guys just completely gassed out. But before that, he had a loss to Sean McCorkle in his UFC debut. 30-13 pro kickboxing record for Mark Hunt. Actually, 2 guys here that have quite a lot of kickboxing experience. Mark Hunt has the distinction of beating Wanderlei Silva and Mirko Krokop in back-to-back fights. It wasn't on the same night, of course, but beating Wanderlei Silva and Mirko Krokop back-to-back in Pride. And that is a huge distinction for anybody, and that is a big feather in the cap of Mr. Mark Hunt. Taking on Czech Congo, 17-6-2 pro MMA record, 10-4-1 in the UFC. He has a lot of UFC experience. He has not lost a fight since 2009. He is 3-0-1 in that span, with wins over Paul Buentello, Pat Barry, and Matt Mitrione. 21-2 pro kickboxing record. So we've got really talented kickboxers, really talented strikers here. What I think the difference in the fight's going to be is Czech Congo is a powerful and underrated wrestler. And I think Congo's wrestling ultimately is what's going to be the difference in the fight. I think that Czech Congo is going to win this fight via TKO. I think he's going to tire out Mark Hunt and TKO him in the 2nd round. I think Mark Hunt's going to have the home field advantage here from being a Pride alum, but Czech Congo's an underrated heavyweight. Absolutely. I never used to be a big fan of Czech Congo, and then I started really watching some of his fights, and his kickboxing, his savate, if you will, is just great. I mean, he's an excellent kickboxer, and he's become an excellent mixed martial artist. So Czech Congo. 2nd round TKO. Going to drop down to welterweight, and this is one of the 3, I guess, headlining fights on the card. We're going to start with Yoshihiro Akiyama against Jake Shields. Akiyama 13-4-2, but he's only 1-3 in the UFC. He won his UFC debut against Alan Belcher in a split decision win, but right now he is on a 3-fight losing streak against Chris Lieben by submission, Michael Bisping by unanimous decision, and a knockout loss to Vitor Belfort in his last fight. This is Akiyama's first fight at welterweight, basically saved his UFC job by agreeing to drop out of the middleweight division and go down to welterweight. This, to me, is another one of these definite do-or-dies. If he loses this, it's 4 straight. And I don't care how sexy he is. I do not think that he would survive 4 straight losses. Especially if, you know, if he doesn't put on a good performance. Going up against Jake Shields, 26-6-1 pro MMA record, 1-2 in the UFC, has really not looked very good in the UFC. He barely squeaked by Martin Kampmann by split decision to get welterweight title shot at GSP. We all know how that ended up. GSP won that fight by unanimous decision, and then Shields got knocked the fuck out by Jake Ellenberger. Shields has a weak stand-up game, and unless he's been working on that hardcore, that is one of his big Achilles heels. Shields does not have a good stand-up game. The whole joke, the K1 Shields, I mean, he doesn't have a good stand-up game, which kind of trips me out, considering that he trains with Gilbert Melendez and Nick Diaz under the Scrap Pack. But, you know, anyways, he's got a weak stand-up game, but he's got a great ground game, obviously. And Shields has the feather in his cap that he's been fighting top competition for years. In Elite XC and in Strikeforce and now in UFC. Also in multiple weight divisions, going from welter to middle back down to welter. And this is another one where, I mean, it's hard to imagine it, and I don't like saying it, but it could be a do-or-die fight. That would be 3 straight losses in the UFC, and I know it's Jake Shields, and I know he's a great fighter, but 3 straight losses is 3 straight losses. So both of these guys, this will probably actually make for a great fight, because it could potentially be do-or-die for both guys. I am going to have to go with Jake Shields in this fight. I think it will be a unanimous judge's decision. Might end up being an unpopular one, being as how they're in Japan and Akiyama is hugely popular over there. I think Jake Shields is going to take this. It may very well be bye-bye for Akiyama. I was going to say sayonara there, but I thought it was that might be a little tacky. So Jake Shields, unanimous decision. Light heavyweight fight, moving up a little bit. Quentin Rampage Jackson returning to Japan, the site of some of his greatest wins in his career, taking on Ryan Darth Bader. Rampage, 32-9 pro record, 7-3 in the UFC. Obviously, former champion at this weight class. And just coming off of a loss in another title fight with John Bones Jones, trying to regain that very title. I still think Rampage is as dangerous as he's ever been. And he claims to be more motivated now than he has been for a long time, which could spell a lot of trouble for his opponents. You know, I think he just sort of ran into a buzzsaw with John Jones, and, you know, we all saw what happened. Rampage is also 13-5, 13-5 lifetime fighting in Japan. So he's got a really good record fighting in front of this very crowd. Darth Bader, 13-2 pro career record, 6-2 in the UFC. Just recently knocked out Jason Brills to break a 2-fight submission losing streak. It was John Jones was the first one, and Tito Ortiz. 9 of his 13 career wins are finishes, but he's only finished half of his UFC wins. He's only finished 3 out of 6. One of the big I know criticisms against Ryan Bader is the so-called second-rate Dan Henderson, sort of a wrestler with a right hand, and that's probably legit. That's probably a legit criticism of him. I always thought Bader was overrated, and I thought that Tito Ortiz especially sort of exposed that. I still think he's a little overrated. I'm not taking Bader in this fight. I'm going with the smart money, and I'm going with Rampage. A motivated Rampage, fighting in Japan. The old Pride spirit, it won't be alive in the event at all, but it will be alive in the Pride alumni. And I think Rampage is going to come out and show the world why he's still dangerous. And I think he is going to TKO Ryan Bader, and I'm even going to say he's going to TKO him in the first round. Hell with it. TKO first round, Rampage Jackson. That leads us to our main event of the evening for the 155-pound strap. Frankie, the Answer Edgar, taking on Benson Smooth Henderson. Frankie Edgar, 14-1-1 pro record, 9-1-1 in the UFC, tons of octagon experience. He finally, definitively beat Gray Maynard in their third fight. TKO'd him in the fourth round. Or sorry, knocked him out, I guess, technically, in the fourth round. He's got, obviously, the 2 wins against BJ Penn. He's also beaten Sean Shirk, and it bothers me that more people don't talk about Sean Shirk. But anyways, obviously, the book's been written on Frankie Edgar. Great wrestling, great boxing, really improved jiu-jitsu game, too, under the Gracie, the Gracie fight camp. He actually trains his BJJ under Henzo with Henzo Gracie Fight Team. So his BJJ is, I think he's only a brown belt, but he is still, he's improving. Benson Henderson, 15-2 professional record, 3-0 in the UFC. So, I mean, no octagon jitters for this kid. He's come over and he has been impressive in his fights. Wins over Mark Bocek, Jim Miller, and Clay Guida. They were all decision wins. 8 of his 15 pro wins have come by submission. He's a Taekwondo fighter. His Taekwondo, his BJJ, and his wrestling are all at high levels. The big thing about Ben Henderson is a very complete fighter. Henderson is good wherever the fight goes. Black belt in Taekwondo. He's an All-American wrestler. I think it wasn't NCAA. It was NAIA, I think. His BJJ, he trains under the Gracie, under Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. It's by someone who has a black belt under Hoist, I think. So I mean, he trains in the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu system. This is a really tough fight to call. But I tell you, man, there's something about Frankie Edgar. There's something about Frankie Edgar that he just finds a way to win. All he do is win, no matter what. I gotta go with Frankie. I mean, I have to go with Frankie Edgar. I think he'll effectively stuff any of Benson's takedown attempts, even though Benson is a bigger, stronger guy. Use his boxing. He doesn't have, Benson's got the reach advantage, but I think Frankie getting in and out with his boxing, Frankie's really fast, got great footwork. I think if Frankie wants to take the fight to the ground, he will be able to lay some ground and pound. I just think Frankie will take it. In the championship rounds, and this is another big thing that really leans in favor of Frankie Edgar. Ben Henderson has only been to the championship rounds twice in his career. Frankie has not had a fight shorter than deep into the fourth round in his last 4 fights. So if this fight goes into deep water, which I figure it will, the longer the fight goes, the more it favors Frankie Edgar, because he's been there in his last 4 fights. I think the fight's going to go into the championship rounds. I think ultimately it'll be a decision, and I believe Frankie Edgar will take it by unanimous decision. So, we're going to go over the fight picks one more time. Starting on the undercard, I've got Taekwon Zhang defeating Issei Tamura by a second-round knockout. I've got Takanori Gomi defeating Eiji Mitsuoka by first-round knockout. I've got Kid Yamamoto defeating Vaughn Lee by third-round TKO. I've got Ricky Fukuda beating Steve Cantwell by unanimous judges' decision. And I've got Takeya Mitsugaki defeating Chris Carriazo by the same unanimous judges' decision. On the main card, Anthony Showtime Pettis defeating Joe Lozon by unanimous judges' decision. Yushin Okami defeating Tim Boach by a split judges' decision. Man, I don't like predicting split decision. But anyways, I got Hatsu Hayoki defeating Bart Palashevsky by second-round submission. I've got Czech Congo defeating Mark Hunt by second-round TKO. I've got Jake Shields defeating Yoshihiro Akiyama by a unanimous judges' decision. I've got Rampage Jackson TKOing Ryan Bader in the first round, and in the championship match in the main event, I've got Frankie Edgar defeating Ben Henderson by unanimous decision. Those are my fight picks. Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube. Want to take a second to shout out to my boys at WeakSaucePhilms. They're actually changing their YouTube handle to ManoImano702. I entered a competition for UFC 143, actually, the Diaz vs. Condit card. Ended up winning an autographed photo of Frank Mir, which is on its way. So a big shout out over there to J-Ro and Wolfman at ManoImano. Follow them on Twitter as well at ManoImano702. Yeah, those are the fight picks. I'm Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter one more time. Arigato very much for watching. Have a great time.